Welcome to The Currency of Grief, the podcast where we confront two of society's most taboo topics, death and money. My name is Justin Weidenfeld, and I'm here to serve as your grief financial officer, guiding you through the complex and emotional journey of what happens when money and mortality collide. Whether you're navigating the aftermath of losing a loved one, looking for practical advice on handling pre- and post-death planning, or simply just wanting to start those hard conversations about legacy while you still can, this space is for you. Together, we'll hear real-life stories from real-life people who have navigated the intersection of grief and money and come out the other side. Our guests will share their stories, practical insights, valuable advice, and moments of clarity so that none of you have to navigate this alone. I'm grateful you've decided to join us on this journey. Now let's dive in. So without further ado, let's meet our guests for today's podcast. I am humbled and honored to be in the virtual studio with Davis Wilkinson. Davis is the CEO and founder of Heirloom. Davis didn't set out to work in the world of loss, but after witnessing his own mother navigate the probate process, he stepped directly into it. From working as a receptionist at a funeral home to observing financial advisors, Davis immersed himself in the realities grieving families face, uncovering a system that often adds complexity to an already painful time. That experience led him to founding Heirloom, a platform designed to simplify estate administration with empathy and clarity. In this episode, Davis shares what it means to rebuild broken systems in the midst of grief and why compassion should be at the center of innovation. Davis, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for your time.
Of course.
Thank you for inviting me.
The pleasure is all mine. Davis, when we talked a couple weeks ago, as you kindly reminded me right before the Masters, one of my favorite weeks of the year, what made you want to come on the podcast?
Grieving is lonely, and I figure the more I can share my story, perhaps that increases the odds that someone would relate, feel a little bit less alone in their grieving story, and hopefully comfort them somehow. Being an executor or personal representative or a trustee is very difficult. So I want folks in those positions to know there is help. And I honestly also wanted to share the story of Heirloom a little bit and describe how we can be helpful to folks in the middle of estate settlement or probate.
Yeah, it's lonely. There's a lot of complexities, as we mentioned in the intro, and there's just so much, and we're not really prepared for it. So I appreciate all you're doing with Heirloom and how the world of loss that you now find yourself in connected us, and just being able to meet you and have this conversation. As you know from listening to other episodes here on The Currency of Grief, we don't hold back. We dive right in. So, Davis, tell us a little bit about your grief story.
Sure. It's been some time, but in many ways it still feels fresh. I had a brother who passed away from a drug overdose when I was 14, and he was in his early 20s. This was in 2009, so it's been 17 years, I suppose. And I remember it like it was yesterday. I had come home from school, and I think I had basketball practice after school, actually, and I was just hanging out in the kitchen, and my stepdad got home from work first, and he invited me to go shoot hoops in the backyard, which was kind, but also unexpected because he's not much of he doesn't like basketball that much. And we were just shooting around, and he was listening and sensitive to me in a way that I noticed something seemed to have been off, even though he was always kind to me. He was especially attentive. Um, And then after we shot hoops, we walked back in the house, and my mother had arrived from where she was, and I had never seen her so distraught. And I knew instantly something was wrong is an understatement. So, and she explained to me that Adam had died, and they didn't know all the details yet, but that we would be flying to Utah from Austin, Texas for the funeral. He had passed in Utah. And I remember going in shock and walking upstairs and watching March Madness. And the next memory I have is my brother coming home from, he was a gymnastics practice. And I assume he heard my mother share the same news and him screaming from downstairs. And that was the moment I remember most, right when learning my brother passed. And I'll pause there. I don't know where you want to go from there, but that was the beginning of the story.
Yeah, thank you for sharing those vivid, raw emotions of just like the visual. I can hear, I can imagine, you watching, trying to drown out the proverbial noise and the thoughts that are going through your head through March Madness, or maybe it's video games for other people. Um, and then hearing your brother screaming. I remember when my dad died, the day after, I let out like a pretty, you know, big scream in the apartment that we were staying at into a pillow. And then there was a feeling of, all right, time to be man and like keep going. So I just appreciate you sharing your story. Tell us the characters. You talked about your mom, your stepmom, and you had, or your stepdad, and you have two brothers.
So Adam, who had passed away, was the oldest. And then Kara, my sister, she wasn't living at home at the time. She was in college. And then Thomas, my older brother. And then me, I'm the youngest. And then we also have step siblings who weren't living at home at the time.
And so it's a lot. There's so many directions we can go. Talk to me about, what happened next. What was it like being the youngest, and the manner that Adam passed away, being an accidental drug overdose? How did the both of those things, being the youngest sibling and being so young, and the fact that it was a drug overdose, how did that impact you?
Um, Everyone has their own grieving journey. Mine was a lot of repression and burying and not processing of emotions until I was older. I remember going to the funeral and I didn't know it at the time. I was just 14, but now being an adult, looking back on those experiences, it was just shock and trauma. And I didn't feel that much. And it sounds bad, sociopathic to say that, I don't know. But the truth is, I felt like I was living in a dream, and it was almost like I was disassociating from the reality around me. I have a lot of compassion for me as a little kid, because this is simply what happens to children navigating death. It's by definition traumatic, which is to say something happens to you and you don't have the tools, you don't have the wherewithal, the capability to navigate it. So that's what happened to me. It wasn't until much later, in my early to mid-20s, that I had opportunity to really grieve. I don't know if that's rare or not. Maybe it's common, but I know it's true to my experience.
So how did you process inevitably what felt right for you?
Um, So answering this honestly requires that I open up a little bit about more of my life, and I'm happy to do this because hopefully it helps others. I was raised as a Mormon kid, and in that religion, and we were a true believing family. There are strong beliefs about what happens in the afterlife. And so there's always this idea that, hey, you'll see your brother again. It doesn't mean they don't allow you to be sad or to grieve. It's not like that. But there is a strong sense of faith that death is not the end. In my early to mid-20s, my beliefs changed. I ended up leaving the Mormon church. And at that time, it was a forcing function to me to face my grief because all of a sudden, this idea, hey, you'll see your brother again, was called into question in my own heart and beliefs and mind. And I don't know what happens after we die. I still am spiritual in many ways, but how I view the afterlife is now different. And I had to navigate what it would be like to never see my brother again for the first time. And that's when everything came crashing down. And I felt the flooding emotion of grief that I perceived my brother and my mom and my sister felt when Adam died. It just took me 8 to 10 years later for that to happen.
Yeah. I feel like that's more common than we think. And I commonly say grief is a roller coaster. It hits you when you least expect it. And especially as a child, when, you know, nobody else is going through it necessarily with you, unless there was somebody, um, you probably just, you bury it. You try to find, you try to move on, be a kid again. And then all of a sudden you have to find reason to it, um, or find your own, you know, reason it in your own mind.
Yeah, I would say it's not for lack of my family trying. My mother is an angel. I got very lucky in the mother lottery, and she tried to talk to me about Adam and loss. She tried to send me to a therapist. Um, she tried to listen to me, and it's not like I was consciously avoiding it. Truly, what was happening was my sub and unconscious selves were repressing away these feelings where I didn't even observe them. And I didn't have what it took to talk about them to even start to integrate my psychology to kind of bring these things out of the depths of my brain. And you know, I'm not proud of it, but I'm sharing this in the sense that I hope it helps others. I feel so guilty for it. Sometimes when my mom or my siblings would share their grief, I ran away from it. It's like saying it was painful for me to hear is not the right word. And this, I feel so bad saying this, but I think the closest word I know is almost emotionally repulsive. Where as a kid, I could not hear it. It made me feel like I just had to get out of the room and get out of this experience listening to my mom share her grief. And I regret that to the core of who I am because I wish I could have been there for her to help her. But I didn't have those tools then.
Yeah. It sounds like, hearing your mom share about her grief was incredibly hard for you. Was it like, how did your siblings grieve? And was your relationship, what was your relationship like after Adam passed with your siblings?
Um, I think they grieved in what would be considered the more commonly healthy way. where I think they had the maturity, frankly, because they were older, to deal with the grief in the moment. And I wasn't there for them like I should have been. I didn't talk about it a lot with them. I kind of just spent a lot of time alone, frankly, or distracted myself with basketball or
Mhm.
normal things high
Yeah,
schoolers
I
do.
would say, I mean, I wouldn't put, pressure on you being, I mean, you should get to the point where hopefully you forgive yourself for that because um you're the youngest sibling. Grief hits everybody differently, physiologically, psychologically, and you have every right to go on your own journey. And if talking about Adam as a 16-year-old, a couple years after he died, um, made you want to leave the room, you have every right to. Part of the mission of this podcast is to help normalize the family conversations around it. And we shouldn't put pressure on one person to, hold their feet to the fire, or like, keep them in a chair and say, hey, we have to talk about, you know, for me, my dead dad. And it's like, hey, if you don't want to be part of this conversation, you don't have to be. This is really hard for everybody.
I appreciate that. Um, I think the truth is, even if Sigmund Freud were in that room, he wouldn't have gotten it out of me because I just didn't have the maturity yet. And it's okay for me to have needed more time. And everyone has their own journey. And I'd like to think I've got compassion for myself there, but you're probably right. I could forgive myself even more.
Who or what was your outlet for support? Was there somebody or something that allowed you to just find a new normal?
I think there are two parts to this response. The first response, the first part is everyone supported me. Right? It takes a village to raise a kid. It takes a village to help someone through grief. If there's anything good about me, it's because of the people that poured into me and invested into my life. The other part of the response is I kind of just kept it all internal and I didn't talk to basically anyone about anything. I journaled a lot. I'm an introvert, and so I tend to process emotions and feelings internally first. I read books about grief and things. I actually got into philosophy. I was a weird kid. But I found solace in those things more than being present with a real person in the same room, opening up.
Yeah. I'm just imagining, the announcer at the basketball, your high school basketball game, being like, he loves philosophy and books about grief. Your shooting guard, Davis Wilkinson.
I sucked. They wouldn't have. They would have spent that much time, but I loved the game.
No, I'm sure. I'm sure you still have that jump shot. So I appreciate that. I mean, that's probably really hard to talk about now. I think we all go through a little bit of a weird high school phase, and when you lose a mother, or for me, like my at that time, my parents were going through a divorce. Um, it's tough to find an outlet, a group of people who get it, and um, being like, I hope the journaling, it sounds like, found like was able to give you some sort of outlet to write down your thoughts, and reading and you know philosophy and all of that, was hopefully a healthy outlet, and it can be for a lot of people. Was there a moment where everything shifted for you?
Um, when I so fast forward to my early mid early to mid-20s, when I left the Mormon church, I started going to a therapy and a lot of therapy. Um, I'm not sure if I can or should say the name of my psychoanalyst and psychiatrist, but that man, that person changed my life, and I'm extremely grateful for him. Um, so what that looked like was I was in my first job at a college, and before work, 3 times a week, I would go talk my feelings out with a therapist for an hour. And the one rule we had in therapy is I was not allowed to hide any thought. So it was more of a psychodynamic, psychoanalytic approach as opposed to cognitive behavioral therapy. So the idea is you just say whatever comes to mind and you follow these thoughts. And the hope is that through that process, you start to uncover what was repressed. And that was the work of unlocking this grief and mourning and healing for me.
Cool. Sounds like that was really helpful.
Helpful and painful and good, all sorts of
Mhm.
things.
Yeah. And I like that it was in the morning because you're focusing on yourself. Like I can't go a day now without doing something active in the morning. And so I for myself in the morning. And so uh, I'm glad you found that outlet. Talk about um talk about what your mom went through navigating, she obviously has her own story, but navigating probate after losing a son.
Of course. So, a little about Adam. He didn't have much. He had a hard life. He had struggled with substance use disorder for years. He actually passed away from a methadone overdose. I'm not sure if you're familiar with methadone, but it's what commonly opioid addicts use to try and get off of these drugs. So he was on an upward trajectory and just made a mistake, and that's part of the tragedy of it. Anyhow, so notwithstanding Adam not having much, my mother still had quite a bit to do for estate settlement. I should clarify, um, you know this of course, but for the audience, sometimes the word probate is used casually just to mean estate settlement. And sometimes it's used really specifically, legalistically, to mean, hey, going through formal probate at your local district or county probate court. She didn't go through formal probate. She just had to wind down his estate, clean up the house, close down the accounts, cancel the gym membership, things of that nature. And even as a 14-year-old kid who was pretty self centered, I remember thinking while observing my mom go through this, well, this is weird. Like, she just lost her firstborn son, and she has to be on the phone with his gym fighting to cancel his membership. And she has to fly out to Utah and clean out this house and talk with the banks and all these sorts of things. Sell or otherwise dispose of assets, figure out what to do with his car, and not to mention navigate weird family dynamics because he was living with my dad. I'm sharing a lot of personal things. I hope it's okay with my family. I think it will be. Who's my mom's ex-husband? Like, so there's all of these emotional dynamics, not to mention the logistic and the legal and the administrative burden that just piles on the grief. And grief is hard enough. And so I have a really salient, that's too formal of a word, strong memory from my childhood, observing that and thinking, that's wrong, that's off. We should do something about that.
And what, like, from a general perspective, you're, well, actually, so your brother lived with your dad, right? His dad, is it your biological dad?
Yep.
Okay. He didn't have a lot, yet you saw your mom go through how, like, this complex situation. And so talk about why estate settlement and probate sucks, not just in Adam's situation, but for everybody.
Some figures. On average, estate settlement can take well north of 100 hours. I talk to Heirloom customers or in discovery sessions where it can commonly take much longer. Heirloom helps shorten that substantially, by the way. An executor is, on average, twice as likely to experience mental health challenges than another family member or person experiencing grief. I should say there's probably some correlation and causation things going on, perhaps some variables at play, because if you're an executor, you're likely very close to the person who passed. But in any case, I think it's fair to say the administrative burden of probate increases the likelihood of mental health challenges after loss. It can cost many thousands of dollars to go through probate, and the idea is someone in the grief and mourning shouldn't have to deal with this on their own. That said, I do want to flag that probate exists for a reason. Probate's not the bad guy. The burden it causes is. So probate or policies, procedures like it have been around for generation after generation after generation to prevent fraud, to prevent inheritance fraud, basically. And what has happened as society has gotten more and more complex, unfortunately, the upshot is probate or estate settlement generally has gotten harder and harder. And so what was 100 years ago a more simple procedure now can take more than 12 to 18 months, hundreds of hours, as I mentioned, and really take away the grieving and healing opportunities from an executor or successor trustee, personal representative, what have you.
Yeah, that's really good context. I mean, I can imagine somebody passing away 200 years ago and looters going into their house and taking their things, and now there's a formal process. There was a formal process established, and then with digital assets nowadays, cryptocurrencies or your Facebook and Instagram accounts, it's just becoming more and more complex and a more and more administrative burden on the people who have to close down somebody's life. And so what else? I mean, feel free to comment on that and talk me through, what else from your research and your conversations, what are the things that an executor has to go through that's out of the normal or that is surprisingly takes forever? And what are the hardest things that maybe an executor or an heir has to go through?
Yeah. So to say yes and to what you had mentioned, an example of how probate's harder now than it used to be is asset discovery or financial discovery, asset and liabilities. So if someone passed away, say 70 years ago, the executor would stand outside the mailbox of the person who had passed away and look for letters from financial institutions like Wells Fargo or Charles Schwab or a pension and collect these envelopes and say, oh, hey, this is what the snapshot of the estate looked like. And this matters, by the way, because executors need to create an inventory of assets for an estate because it's required by formal probate, but also because it's what you got to do to create a balance sheet to prepare inheritance distributions. You don't want to leave money on the table. So it's a key part of an executor's job. So that's what it looked like, say, 70 years ago, standing at the mailbox. Today, snail mail isn't used as often. And, a lot of different assets and liabilities, primarily assets because liabilities, they'll follow you. But they can fall through the cracks if you don't have access to an email account, say, where someone was receiving their statements, or if someone had purchased a life insurance policy, but they didn't have letters mailed to them about the policy, you can lose those things. Or unclaimed assets are, growing in preponderance. That's too formal of a word. They're a lot more common these days. And people just don't know what digital systems they can use to be able to find all of these different outstanding assets. So now to answer the second part of your question. what are the hardest, perhaps most unexpected things for an executor? I would say problem number one is people just don't know what it means to be an executor, and they don't know the responsibilities that are involved. You probably experienced this yourself when you were executor. I think you said you've been one twice. But the term executor, half of people know what it means, kind of, half of people don't. If their loved one had a will, what probably the setup looked like is their loved one came to them when they were still alive and said, "Hey, will you be my executor?" And someone's like, "Sure, I'm happy to help." But they don't know, maybe they don't know all the obligations. Most Americans don't have a will. 60% of Americans or so don't have a will. So commonly, someone was never asked to be executor until after someone has passed away, and perhaps they're court appointed and they're just trying to be a good citizen, a good friend or family member to their loved one. Anyhow, so they get this big project called probate, and they got to figure out what to do. Oh, and by the way, you're a fiduciary, and which means you have legal responsibilities to do this thing right. You could be held liable if you do something wrong, fraudulent, God forbid. And so the stakes are high. And so I've talked to executors who, without Heirloom, had taken classes, had paid for multiple books, had literally, this is not exaggeration. I talked to an executor who spent over 1,000 hours on estate settlement, and a big portion of that was just trying to figure out what in the world to do. And then maybe 30 seconds longer, and then I'll pause. Another challenge for executors is the family dynamics. Unfortunately, this is all too common. Every single day, I talk to multiple Heirloom customers or prospects who go through this, where family estrangement happens as a result of inheritance challenges. There's a common saying, I'm sure you've heard it before, where you don't really know someone until you've had to share an inheritance with them. And there's so many dynamics, familial, tribal, interpersonal, just human, that come out in a moment like this, and nobody's at their best in the midst of grief. And it leads to a lot of interpersonal challenges, and the executors in the fray of it all.
Yeah. Pivoting, I mean, that, like, I have everything you said, I was like on the edge of my seat. Like I enjoy talking about this stuff because it has such a profound impact on people's lives and families.
Mm-hmm.
Going back to your story and Adam, who was Adam's executor, and did Adam's estate, being he was so young, did it go through a formal probate?
He didn't have a will, didn't go through a formal probate. It was largely informal, in the sense that my mom took care of everything, whether she was named executor or not. And this happens commonly, where perhaps it doesn't go formally through the probate courts, but a responsible person takes care of things as they should,
Yeah,
to the best of their ability.
and and maybe this isn't your story to tell, but was there a tension between your mom and your dad in the days, weeks, months after grief, being like, hey, should mom or dad be the executor or take the responsibility?
The honest truth is, I don't know the completeness and complexity of those conversations, and it's probably not my story to tell in any case.
That's fair. And so, but that adds another complexity to it. Divorce, 50% of people, on average, get divorced, unfortunately, in their lives in the United States. And so that step siblings, parents, that adds another complexity to who's making the decisions. The podcast before this that's going to air you'd like this as a sort of a basketball analogy. Who's got ball, right? I may be a really good numbers person. I may be super organized. Maybe I'm the executor, but I don't know diddly squat about, medical terms. So I should not be the person who is helping somebody make medical decisions on their behalf. So these are all things that you should think about when you're choosing your team. As Davis said, 60% of people don't have a will in the United States, and so they haven't even thought about this, yet alone communicated it to their family. And so we talked about all the intricacy is the various tasks that executors go through, the fiduciary responsibility, the hours it takes to just understand what your responsibility is and where to find things. It's not just in the mail nowadays, but it's email, it's Facebook Messenger, whatever it might be. What's one thing every executor should know, in your opinion? Putting you on the spot here, obviously.
No, I appreciate it. This might sound a little funny, but I wish they knew from the start how hard the process is. I can't tell you how often Heirloom prospects and clients will come to us midstream and say, "Hey, I bit off way more than I could chew. Can you just take this off my plate now?" And we do, and we happily do. But it would be so much easier for them if they got help from the start. And I know that may sound self-serving to say that, but it is also the truth. Getting your ducks in a row from the beginning of the process can change the game for you.
That's great advice. And so how does Heirloom help? And what prompted, obviously we know what prompted you to start Heirloom, but what is really the core passion behind the business, and how, what are the services that Heirloom offers?
So the core passion is our mission, and our mission is to help comfort those who mourn by streamlining estate settlement so families have time and space to heal. We're a Delaware public benefit corporation, so we're legally obligated to fulfill that mission, and it drives us every day. I can confidently say that, and it brings meaning to our work. How we help, we have self-serve tools, and we have a managed service. So you can think of Heirloom kind of like the TurboTax of probate. So just as TurboTax has a self-serve guide, but it also has the TurboTax experts or something like that they call them, so too does Heirloom have software you can use for yourself, by yourself as an executor, or you can also bring in our team to manage probate effectively on your behalf. We have 3 key value propositions. We have many more, but we'll just keep it simple. The first is we have a personalized guide to walk executors through step by step what they and their estate need to do, soup to nuts, to make probate go well. So what that looks like is on the back end of our systems, we have close to 1,500 different steps in a database that could be relevant to an estate, depending on the nature of the assets, the jurisdiction, things of that nature. And when someone onboards onto our system, we have effectively a recommendation engine that tees up a coherent, logical plan for them. The second way we help, and it harkens back to our earlier conversation about asset discovery, is we have a programmatic inheritance discovery engine where we search over 120 billion public records, north of 6,000 data sources, many other sorts of records to, with the click of a button, as it were, programmatically search for your loved ones, real estate holdings, business holdings, liens, judgments, UCC filings, bank accounts, life insurance policies, things of this nature. Unclaimed assets are a big one. So, by the way, 1 in 4 life insurance policies goes unclaimed. 96% of estates have unclaimed assets. And so the upshot, therefore, is so many estates leave money on the table. And so it's Heirloom's job to help maximize maximize the value of someone's inheritance. In addition to making their lives easier as an executor, we help them, get more money and get it faster by closing probate more quickly.
Yeah. And I have played around with the tool after Davis and I.
That's right.
And I think there was, like a $2 check or something that my grandma had in California when she lived in California that I did find using Heirloom. So, I can attest. The service is great. I did use the self-service because we were already through probate for the most part. How much, now putting on my business hat, how much of Heirloom is human interaction versus technology? And what is your, I'm sure you're constantly navigating this, but what is your opinion based on the emotions of loss of helping an executor, human to human versus technology based?
This is a really insightful question because we're actually learning here at Heirloom, despite having served thousands and thousands of users. So our self-serve tools are what they sound like. You know, product-led growth, as they say. You create an account and you work through the probate process, interacting entirely with software, not with a person. Our managed service is face-to-face, white glove, human-to-human conversations, constantly messaging back and forth on our platform, having calls. In the back end, what our managed service is doing is using technology to drive efficiencies and get things done automatically. And the reason why that matters is we're able to pass on the savings of efficiencies onto our customers. So for what it's worth, to make things concrete, and I'm happy to share numbers, in many states, it depends on jurisdiction, but a professional executor can charge 3 to 5% of the gross estate value. Heirloom, for our managed service, only charges 1%. And the reason why we can do that is because we have technology automations on the back end, and we're happy to share these savings on to our end users.
Makes sense. And for somebody who is an executor, and maybe they're concerned about, you need, in order to access some of these funds, past addresses, social security numbers, date of birth. From a data standpoint, everybody's worried about cybersecurity. Talk a little bit about that, and what would you say to somebody who comes to Heirloom to use their service and is worried about, inputting data and somebody stealing their dead grandmother's social security number?
So they should be thinking about that from being a responsible executor standpoint, but also from, hey, they love their loved one and they want to make sure fraud doesn't happen. So I'll answer your question in two parts. The first is the value of putting a face to the name. And the second is our data governance policies and procedures. So one thing we've really found valuable in building trust with executors is putting ourselves out there as founders. And by the way, I am not the only person working on Heirloom. My team is incredible. My co-founder, Brady, is the man. Heirloom's success, and hopefully its future success, is due just as much because of him as it is because of me. So I wanted to give a shout out to Brady Miller.
And unfortunately, Brady had to leave the office for the podcast.
That's right. He was working too hard, working on the keyboard. So anyway, we have found if folks just get a chance to talk to us, they can see, hey, we're real earnest people, trying to help, but also trying to run an honest business, and that increases the likelihood of them working with us. But now to your actual question about data governance. Data privacy and security is foundational to everything Heirloom does. It is the primary thought in our architecture and design decisions. But you don't have to take our word for it. We have paid for a cloud application security assessment, which we passed. We have finished our implementation of SOC 2 and are in the middle of a penetration test. Subsequently, immediately thereafter, we're going to start our observation periods for Type 1 and Type 2 SOC 2. I know this is a lot of gobbledygook. What this means is we have outside auditors coming in, kicking the tires on our systems to ensure that we have best-in-class encryption standards, privacy standards, all of the sorts of things that you would expect a world-class security privacy practice to have in place. at a technology company like Heirloom, and I can tell you we take it extremely seriously, and we appreciate our users' trust, and we will not betray it.
That's great. Yeah, that's definitely the peace of mind, having the relationship with the founders, and also, literally kicking the tires and some, from my limited knowledge, profound gobbledygook that is like, that's the real deal. I want to change gears a little bit and go back to a conversation we were having, a couple minutes ago about estate administration. I want you to put your policy hat on, not your CEO founder. And if you were to make a change or multiple changes to the estate administration process from a government standpoint or a legal and logistical standpoint, what would be the ideal system? Is there anything that you would change, or are you like, hey, Heirloom's, here to serve the existing system? Like, we're not gonna. I don't want to fudge it up because then we don't have a business. But what would you change?
I appreciate this question because I have so many thoughts.
Yeah.
I don't think it's that productive to complain, but I do have some suggestions on how I think we might improve societally. The first is perhaps more pragmatic. Creating a government mandated standard for financial institutions such as banks on responsiveness, best practices for how banks should work with executors when they're seeking for the assets of a loved one, for example. For what it's worth, the UK has a set of standards that financial institutions must adhere by. And in my hopefully humble opinion, I think we could follow their lead and implement some similar standards here in the United States. A second, in my view, governmental, legal, regulatory, whatever form it takes, approach we can take is, how do I say this? More scrutiny, or at least higher standards for unclaimed assets and escheated assets, and how hard or easy they should be for beneficiaries and executors to discover. I don't want to get into the how or why because I don't want to assess blame. But in my view, right now, it is too hard, too damn hard for someone to find unclaimed assets. And the stakes are high. In the next 15 to 20 years or so, people estimate between 84 and 100 trillion US dollars are going to transfer between generations. Experts I talk to estimate 2 trillion of those dollars will be unclaimed and escheated, and much of that, perhaps I should say most, I don't know, but I think most, will not be claimed by beneficiaries and heirs, and it will be in effect in the coffers of government. Whether that's right or that's wrong, I'll let you decide, but I think it's something we should be talking about in our government.
Mm-hmm. So 2 points on that. One is, person by person, I looked up my dad's and my grandma's unclaimed property in both, all the states that they lived in. And, there were a couple hundred, maybe $200. Okay, $200 on a couple $100,000, couple $1,000,000 estate isn't massive. But the number you quoted of $2 trillion, when you combine it and you grow it from everybody, the entire generation, from generation to generation, everybody dying, that's a massive freaking number that should be talked about more.
It's real. I was talking with one of our partners, prospective partners. I'm not really sure how to characterize them, and we were going through anonymized or public records. This wasn't sensitive data. Individuals, unclaimed assets, and there was a person in California, just anecdotally, I saw that had $8 million in unclaimed property, which had not been distributed yet to heirs and beneficiaries. And it was very possible that that would just fall through the cracks and never be claimed, in my view, by the rightful owners.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yep, and that's not uncommon.
Yeah, probably worth, a lot of money, or maybe didn't have anybody to leave their assets to.
It happens more often than you might expect. Bankruptcy proceedings, uncashed checks from the government. There are lots of sources of these, and crypto, depending on the dormancy period. Crypto has a dormancy period of 3 years, and all of a sudden it pops out of the woodwork, and there's millions of dollars that people don't know what to do with. So
Yeah.
it's more common than you might think.
Wow. And then the process of getting these unclaimed assets. Well, I'll link a couple links to the unclaimed assets. You can look up, I'm in Florida unclaimed assets, and you'll be sent directly to the state comptroller and be able to look up the individual you may want to search or yourself. I have a friend.
Shameless plug. Can
Yeah.
I jump in? Shameless plug. Forgive me. So one thing that Heirloom does is with the help of our soon-to-be data partner, we don't just search those, like for example, missing money or Kelmar databases. We search that plus 499 more, and you would be surprised by how much more rich, frankly, valuable data and assets you can find by working with Heirloom. So forgive me if that's self-promotional, but truly it will help you if you don't just go through those databases.
Yeah, you're good. Thank you for letting me know. That's yeah.
Yep.
The other point that I wanted to bring up is my college roommate freshman year. He's really funny. He'll like look me up or look up a family member. It's like, what's your grandfather's name again? Look it up. He's like, hey, like, did you know he had $500? That's at the state. Like, don't you want this? And I'm like, hey, can't we just catch up like normal people? But he's hilarious. He'll find people's money and make them money without doing too much. So
that's great.
So as we gear to the end of the show, I want to talk about takeaways and then advice you have for our audience. So first thing is this may be a layup, but basketball pun intended. Were there any financial or logistical resources you wish you had or you wish your mom had for during after Adam's passing?
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to promote Heirloom a little bit more. Yeah, listen, I built Heirloom to be what my mom didn't have. So I wish she had our tools so that she could have gotten the job done a lot faster, and so that she could have spent more time healing and with family and community. And so truly, in my heart of hearts, it's honest. Like, I do think Heirloom is helpful to people. I think it's worth it. And I think it's what people deserve to have and to use.
Appreciate that. And now moving on to sort of building your life without your brother after his passing, were there any questions that you didn't get to ask Adam that you wish you had the opportunity?
Oh, goodness. I have never been asked this question in my life. And I don't remember seeing it on the prep, so I appreciate how this is going to be like from the heart. The only way to answer this is extremely vulnerably. So please forgive me if this is oversharing, but I think this can help people. I'm not a psychologist, but my understanding is that children or siblings of addicts who die commonly repeat the addictions of their loved ones because they think, oh man, if my dad or my brother or my mom, my sister, I know they love me, but if they chose that drug or that drink over me, in a sense, they chose to leave me. They chose to die instead of being with me because of that thing. That thing must be incredible. It must be really great. And so they repeat the cycle and they fall into the trap of these substances. And so, to answer your question, I would ask my brother if he loved me more than he loved the drugs. And I know the answer is yes, but it would do a lot of healing for me. I'm grateful to say I think it's because of my mom. She truly saved my life, but I don't have the substance use challenges my brother did. And I think it's because my mom taught me how to love myself and not turn to the drugs in the wake of my brother's loss. Yeah.
Thank you for answering that incredibly vulnerably. And
I hope it helps people.
yeah, I know it will. And how has your loss, your journey through loss, the growth experience changed your approach to life and planning for yourself?
Oh man.
This was on the prep sheet now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I think there's two different questions there. There's life, and then there's like planning. By that, I think you meant like estate planning or financial planning. I used to work in big tech. I was in startups, then big tech, and yada yada. I quit when I knew I wanted to do Heirloom, and I left to be a receptionist at a funeral home, which alongside Heirloom was the most meaningful job I've ever had. And in part, the reason why it was meaningful is I saw death in the face every single day. As they say, I saw the skull beneath the skin. And it is singularly humbling to realize this might be my last breath. This might be my last day on earth when you work in the death industry and you see it every day, every day, every day. And it's trite, but it's true that kind of living in the moment and being grateful for what you have and living every day, as if it were your last. Those are lessons you do learn from loss. Um, and in a weird silver linings kind of way, I'm grateful for that lesson. Um, Even though I'd much rather have Adam back, and I'd much rather those people at the funeral home didn't have to be there because they still have their loved one. And then with respect to planning, yeah, do your estate planning. Heirloom's helpful for probate and estate settlement. What is more helpful than Heirloom, perhaps, even though we're still helpful if you do good planning, is getting a will and a trust in place, all sorts of things, because they give a roadmap to your executor, whereas otherwise they have to go through, they're called intestate procedures, and they're a lot more rigorous.
Yeah. Thank you, Davis. As we wrap up, one main final question. I want you to imagine 14-year-old is listening to this podcast, just lost their brother to drug overdose. And I want you to share any grief mantras or words of wisdom, advice that you'd like to tell that person in their battle with grief as they navigate their journey going forward.
It's funny. My therapist asked me a similar question just a few days ago, so I feel like there's a theme here. I'm in a reflective mode, reflective time. What would I say? I don't think I'd say anything to him. I think I would just sit with him and be present. This might sound a little woo-woo, as they say, but I think there's enormous power to presence and non-judgment and listening. And I hope that by doing that, I could demonstrate to my younger self that there's nothing you have to say, there's nothing you have to do, there's no strict timetable. Just be present to what feelings and thoughts and environments you're in, and let life guide you on a journey of healing that's right for you. If I could have when I was 14, I would have grieved in the moment. But my life has its own unique story, and it took me 10 years to get to that point, but maybe I wouldn't have started Heirloom if that hadn't been the case. And now, I don't mean this in a braggy way, I just mean it in a meaningful way. Thousands and thousands, tens of thousands, I think, people have read my brother's name and heard his story because of Heirloom's website. And that's because my journey was unique. And it's not better or worse, but that's what I needed. And I'm so grateful to Heirloom's team to make it possible for my brother's life to not be forgotten.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing those powerful words of wisdom, your powerful journey, and the journey that you're on, honoring his legacy and bringing Heirloom and these resources to hopefully tens of thousands, if not more, people going forward.
It's the hope. We're going to stay humble and hungry. We'll make it happen.
I love it. Davis, how can people find you if they want to connect with you or learn more about Heirloom?
Just go to our website, heirloom.care, C-A-R-E.
Cool. Nice and easy. I'll link it to the show notes.
Yep.
Davis, thank you so much. This has been a really, really amazing episode. I appreciate the humble energy that you bring, the positiveness, the insights that you have around state settlement, estate administration, everything the executor goes through, loss, and I'm glad we were able to connect. It means a lot.
No, I genuinely appreciate it, and I admire you. What you're doing with this space is needed and important and courageous. So I'm happy, I'm honored, humbled to be a part of it. So thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your story today, Davis. Podcast listeners, thank you so much for joining us for this episode of The Currency of Grief. Don't forget, it's a great day to have a great day. So go have a great day. We'll see you next time.
Thanks.
Thank you for joining me on this episode of the Currency of Grief podcast. My hope is that today's conversation brought you clarity, comfort, and even a spark to start those difficult but necessary conversations in your own life. If you found this episode helpful, it would mean the world to me if you would share it with one other person who you feel this podcast could impact. And please, take a moment to leave us a 5-star review. Your review will help us reach more people who need this resource. Remember, the best time to talk about death and money was yesterday. The second best time is now. Until next time, I'm Justin Weidenfeld, your Grief Financial Officer, and this has been the Currency of Grief podcast.